Hello, everybody, and welcome to STOked, the ultimate Star Trek online podcast. My name is Chris.
My name is Jeremy.
Yo there, J-Man.
Yo there, Chris.
Hey. So today's episode, we've got a big one. Coming up later in the episode is our community feedback segment.
And it's going to be a big one.
Yeah, we asked you a week ago if you could pull any moment in the Star Trek series as your inspiration for a Foundry mission, what would it be?
Yeah, you sent in emails. Not only are we going to check out some of those, but we're also going to put up callers on our Skype video wall. We're going to have like
live call-ins.
A live panel.
Yeah.
To discuss Star Trek moments, epic Star Trek moments.
And we've got
so nerdy.
We've got our soapbox. It's right here and ready to go. Coming up in the news segment, we're going to pull that bad boy out and get a little ranty about the Foundry. But we've also got some other news we want to cover first. But before we tell you all of that, I wanted to mention that if you've ever thought about watching this show on your TV,
and who wouldn't?
Right?
Yeah.
There's actually a couple of ways you can do that now. If you happen to have a Roku box or a Boxy box, and maybe even a TiVo. But at least on the Roku and the Boxy, you can go in there and there's a Blip TV app. And we now have a channel on Blip TV. And if you go into the Blip TV app on one of your devices, search for Jupiter Broadcasting, and boom.
That makes me feel famous.
You can start watching it right there on your TV system. How do you like that?
I could be on your television.
All right. Why don't we start off the news segment with the news about the changes to the efficient impulse engines?
Yeah, well, just to boil it down to the gist of it, they're going to be nerfing it. We don't know the exact changes that they're going to be making, but I think this is being headed up basically by Al Rivera, who we've had on the show, Captain Gecko, has come out and said, you know what, everybody, quote-unquote, everybody, uses either the Aegis engine, the Borg engine, or the efficient impulse engine.
Of course.
Which is only like a Mark 4 or 5 equipment, and everybody just uses them all the way up to Vice Admiral.
Why wouldn't you?
Unless you replace them with the Borg or Aegis.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the gist of the matter, though. Why wouldn't you? It's an awesome piece of equipment. All that extra energy, and the only thing you gain by swapping it out is more speed.
Is the issue now that they don't have a way to provide something even better?
Possibly.
And so they have to nerf it in order to allow for something better to come along?
There's also been some speculation that they need to nerf it in order to make things like special consoles more
special.
More special. Stuff like the one that came with the Oberth. Things like that.
Interesting to see where this goes. I rock the Aegis engine. On Tribble, I have the Borg engine. So I'll be curious to see
But until you
changes.
got either of those, I'm sure you were still using the efficient.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the time at least. Sometimes I swap stuff around. But,
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of changing things around, Jesse Heinig came in the forums and said there's going to be some fixes down the road for cloak problems, but nothing right away.
Yeah, most of you know, and if you don't, then you're probably not playing a Klingon, but the fact of the matter is that every time you get a pop-up dialogue right now, your cloak is turned off.
You drop cloak.
Automatically.
Yeah.
Which can be a really bad thing for Klingons, especially because of refresh timers, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so Jesse came out and he joined, there's a testing channel that you can join called TTS, or is it TSS? I'll double check that.
We'll have it in the show notes.
Anyway, he came out into that test channel and told people, yes, we are going to change that, but in order to get it to work right, we have to revamp every zone in the game.
Oh, so this wasn't even in the forums.
No.
This was in the chat.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to Peregrine Falcon in the chat room for sending that along to us.
It is TTS.
Okay, TTS
Confirmed.
is the chat channel.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Well, it's weird that they have to do that, and that means big old hella major patch
I would think,
coming down the road.
I would think if they have to do something that involves changes to all those areas like that, and it sounds like it might be something to do with their overall zoning back-end system, that's a long fix. That's a fix like maybe when you revamp sector space so that it's zoneless.
He did drop
kind
a
of thing.
hint in the chat room that it might have to wait until they do a major revamp, like they're talking about revamping exploration. Stuff like that. It'll probably come out around the same time.
So in other words,
for you KDF players that are very concerned with this, it will get fixed. It's just such a major fix.
Yeah, I would say plan for it not to be fixed for a while.
Yeah.
And that goes to Foundry authors too when you're thinking about making your gameplay content.
So good news, bad news.
Yeah. Now I mentioned, Foundry authors. There's been some hoopla over these grind missions that have been finding their way into the Foundry over the last couple of weeks.
Now these grind missions, if you haven't played any of them, are basically empty space maps with a bunch of enemies in it.
Yeah.
And the most common ones are space grinding missions where they actually don't even have you kill the enemy.
Right.
They have your warp core explorers.
That's the one that I tried. I figured these were going to get pulled by Cryptic pretty soon, so I thought I'm going to try one. I have no interest in actually doing that, but I want to try it for the show. I jumped in there, and what the scenario was for me is I zone in, and just right outside of weapons range is so many bad guys stacked
Hundreds.
on. I can't even count them.
Yeah.
It's just they're just stacked, and what the goal really is not to defeat them. But to get close enough to them so that when you would blow up, you would take out as many of them as possible, and thereby getting credit for
and
killing
even
them.
though it's only 1, 2, or 3 per kill, there's hundreds of them, so it's a crap ton of XP. Just boom, and you win.
Yeah. And so this obviously was an attempt for people to make these missions so that they could roll a new character and grind up fast.
Yes.
And so Cryptic felt that it was time to stop that. So they pulled the mission, and when this is the story that I've read, is they pulled the mission, and then it was almost immediately republished.
Mm-hmm.
And so their solution was to PM the user saying, "Hey, you're being suspended," and then
remove their access to
access.
create Foundry missions. I actually heard another version of the story that these people weren't warned, so I don't know which one is true because I didn't make it grind missions. So I guess the core of the controversy here is, was it warranted or not? And I know that I think just between the two of us, we're kind of on both sides of the fence here.
Yeah, at first I initially was like, yeah, these aren't appropriate. These shouldn't be here. And, we've heard from Foundry authors who have said, those push my content down on the list,
mm-hmm.
which
is true. And that's actually my number one argument for why I would say, yes, this had to be done.
I disagree because, I think if you rely on the review system and sometimes just going by the titles, you can pretty quickly identify what's a grind mission versus what's good quality gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are paying for this game, and if you want to play those missions, that's up to you. That's that's fine. But you're not the other Foundry authors. That's not your target audience, anyways. So you're not really missing out on your target audience because those people are smart enough just to skip past that stuff.
Hopefully, yeah.
And if Cryptic was to implement some sort of category system where you could have dialogue heavy category, you could have grind heavy category, and then
just those two would be great to have. This one's a diplomatic mission. This one's a combat mission.
You mentioned on the pre-show on the live stream is just a decent tag system.
Mm-hmm.
So you could tag grind, you could tag dialogue, and you could then maybe filter by non-dialogue heavy or
mm-hmm.
dialogue heavy.
I agree to a certain extent of what you're saying about the rating system, specifically because people that like the grind missions, as you've said, would not be looking for. Well, they wouldn't even probably enjoy my mission.
Right.
So if they were directed to play my Fungus Among Us, they would probably give it a low rating because they just want to kill things.
Yeah.
And there's not much combat on mine.
So then you have to look at it from the aspect of community management and the fact that the Foundry is quickly becoming its own living beast, and you have to ask how far do you want Cryptic reaching in to shape this community, because you can go too far in such that you'll retard the growth of the community because they don't feel like they have control over their destiny in that community.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful not to sort of impact that growth, but you don't want to also impact the overall greater game. So they had kind of a whack-a-mole situation here where they had to decide, okay, we're going to stop this
mm-hmm.
because we're worried that people are going in there and grinding.
Yeah.
But it seems like if you are truly worried about that, you can't sit on this hypocritical line where then you also sell in the C store an 8-hour XP bonus for $1 amount.
Yeah, it not only hypocritical but also nickel and diming.
Yeah, you can game the XP system if you're willing to pay us. Is kind of what the message is there. And here's the thing: is I could also see a scenario where a person, like, I thought about it. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. My Klingon's a low-level character. As a VA, I've just grown not to really enjoy the low-level content as much.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I find the ground combat to be a little dogpiley and a little slow. And so to be honest with you,
especially at those low levels when you don't have as many fun toys as you.
Yeah, exactly. And your ship's so boring and all this stuff. And I'm just like, I just don't want to do that. I want all my toys.
Mm-hmm.
So for a moment I thought, I could take my Klingon character, I could go pound one of those 8-hour XP boosts, and then go do some grind missions, and maybe in a couple of hours I could get my Klingon character to a spot where I'd want to play it and enjoy what I'm paying for.
Yeah, I would do the same thing. My Klingon is already a Captain 3 or something like that,
mm-hmm.
but I'm at a point where I don't really. Why would I not play my VA? So,
well, and as a consumer of this game, I bought the lifetime subscription with the hour it was available,
mm-hmm.
And I would never do something like that on even my first or second playthrough.
Right. Because you want to experience it as it was intended.
I want to enjoy the product that I'm paying for.
Absolutely.
And I, as a consumer that has the ability to weigh those pros and cons, I make the decision what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, my choice has been not to use those grind missions except for just test it for the show. But I thought, I could see how I could augment my enjoyment of this game by utilizing that XP boost that Cryptic is selling and these kinds of missions.
So maybe, I'm just going to spitball this out there. But,
go for it, J-Man.
Because I kind of see the side of the people that created this grind missions are now being penalized because they're just trying to help people enjoy the game at the higher levels. And that does kind of suck, even though I still consider the grind missions to be an exploit. And they probably needed to be removed. But why not, instead of removing it, restrict access in some way so that only alts, the second playthrough, that somehow when you reach VA or Lieutenant General, your account gets flagged.
Well, there's two things here. I think there's two. The bigger picture topics that you just touched on in that description is one. There just needs to be a better way to bypass the gameplay content that people don't want to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the solution to that isn't by playing whack-a-mole with Foundry missions, but the solution to that is by giving us a gameplay mechanic to accomplish what players want. Like you said on the live stream, the BOF promotion system.
We've been hearing that there might eventually be a way to promote one of your bridge officers to captain.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Then I could just immediately skip right over that need.
Mm-hmm.
Get me to and captain's right where I want to go, too.
But until that system is in place, I can see the grind mission serving a purpose for the players that want to skip past the low-level junk.
Here's the other angle. You mentioned, you consider it an exploit.
I do.
Well, the one that I tried, and I think the way the majority of them worked is, I warp core breached and then took out hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what Cryptic did as a quick fix is they said, well, you know what, that's kind of excessive anyways. We're going to limit the warp core breach so it only affects 5 other ships. So what they did is they effectively made the point of those missions moot.
Yeah.
So they don't have to play whack-a-mole. But what I find interesting is the overall implication that they had to make a global game change on this to fix that.
I'm not upset with that, actually. And I think that it would have been better serve the game better just to do only the warp core change.
That's and not pull those.
Yeah.
Well, so I agree, and because you eventually make them inert anyways.
Right.
But do you find it concerning that to fix an exploit, and you got to figure there's going to be thousands of people banging on the Foundry trying to find little ways to game the system.
Yeah, sure.
And one of the first kind of solid ones that really took off, the correction was to make a global change throughout the entire game that affects storyline content, that affects PvE content, that affects all Foundry missions. To fix a problem that came up in the Foundry, they had to impact every aspect, every area. They had touched every aspect of the game in a way.
I could see how you could potentially be concerned by that, but in my personal opinion, I think that at this point we're getting to the point where the Foundry is STO, and I think it needs to drive the content.
Well, and that's an interesting thing because you look at where we're at right now. It's April, and we're in this period where there's sort of a content drought. We're getting some things, but not a lot, and we're waiting for Season 4.
Mm-hmm.
If you thought about where this game was at this same time in April of last year, if we went on a 3.5 month or whatever it is content drought, the game would not be able to survive without the Foundry. So I agree with you that the Foundry is becoming an absolutely crucial aspect to STO. Not to mention it's one of its unique competitive advantages as an MMO.
Yeah.
So that again raises concern about a certain level of over-management because you do have to create a community ecosystem that can sustain itself so it can scale with the scope of the Foundry.
And that kind of leads into the next subject is the community ecosystem around the Foundry has many holes that need to still be addressed, like the fact that people have a hard time publicizing their missions so that people can play it. And that's another argument against the grind missions is because if you have 3 or 4 of those grind missions taking up the top slots, then those ones that are trying to reach the top slots have to try just that little much harder to get up there.
I think you solved it with the tagging system. I think when it's tagged grind and then you can do minus hash grind or whatever it is, and then all those are just no longer in the list.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are seeing, though, is like a member of our community, Murphy, he's been on the show, and he's a member of Jupiter Force. He created a astounding trailer for his Foundry mission, the Jemadar Alliance, with incredible demo work, with great editing, great music, and great visuals that promote his Foundry mission. I mean, he's stepping up the competition here.
He's also got player testimonials there in the middle of the thing as well to show you that it's not just him showing it off, but other people have enjoyed this as well.
And he's putting it up on YouTube, and what he's doing now is he's bringing the level of marketing for Foundry missions to a whole new level now.
Now,
the noise.
Murphy's not the only person out there doing this.
No.
I've seen also trailers for Rachel Garrett's The Longing.
Yeah.
And I think Habraha has at least one trailer out there, and several other people are doing this, but I think that's where it's going. I mean, it's beyond just creating a mission that people can play on in the game. It's starting to take root in the community, becoming these complete creative projects that it has great potential.
It just
not just for players of STO, but members of the Star Trek community in general.
Before we move to the next point, I just want to mention again, this would be a great opportunity if Murphy could have linked somehow to his Foundry mission. That would be the next thing, right?
If there was that web interface that we talked about several episodes ago.
Some sort of connection. Watching Murphy's trailer made me think Foundry Mission the Foundry is such a beautiful platform for machinima.
It really is.
I mean, I think if the community organized around, I'd love to see a few different machinima projects that maybe different aspects of the STO universe, maybe a Klingon side and a Federation side. Wow. And can you imagine if done right and if the interest is there and the passion is there, this could be the kind of thing that the players of the Foundry who then go and create content on the web could then reach out to traditional Star Trek fans who haven't considered STO yet, and reach to those traditional Star Trek fans with Star Trek content and bring them into the game.
Yep.
Imagine if the Foundry just started self-populating the game.
Absolutely, and I believe it could. I mean, there are so many Star Trek fans out there. We've met some of the guys at the Starfleet International fan base. They're not MMOers. They don't even really like video games as a whole, but they're huge Star Trek fans. They write fanfic. Yeah. They do live action role playing. They do stage plays that are set on the bridge of the Enterprise. I mean, there's so many creative outlets out there for these people to tell stories. Now there's one more where they can come to us.
People are so hungry for new Star Trek content. I mean, that's one of the reasons why this show has been so successful.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why this fan project Star Trek Phase 2 has been so successful. And they've just launched a new episode too. And now I'll warn you, it is what it is it's a continuation of the original series. Think of it as like the 3rd, 4th, 5th season of the original. Or I guess it'd be the 4th and 5th season.
But it is just a fan project.
It's a fan project.
It's made by folks like you and I.
With just better resources and
fun.
And nice sets, really, and some great visuals. So watch it with your shields down. But we have a link in the show notes. Open alien frequencies, lower your shields, and enjoy this. It's actually pretty great. It involves a lost starship that they go to recover, and you find out that it's been essentially taken over by pirates. And,
that have been reverse engineering it.
And have improved some areas, haven't improved other areas, and so now it's like a slightly stronger Constitution-class ship up against the Enterprise.
But now, imagine this. Imagine if the Foundry had already been out for years before those Phase 2 guys had even gotten their project off the ground. It would be potentially possible that they would have launched into the Foundry, created these maps, created these scenarios and everything, and published it using game resources from Star Trek Online as this massive project that's now got this huge fan following.
I know.
It could have been completely different.
And it still can happen. All of the tools are there. The publishing platforms are there. And really, I would think if you wanted a sophisticated project, I would think something like the existing fleet systems could provide supports. I think fleets could be built out to support projects like this.
I would not be surprised to actually see entire fleets launched with the express purpose of creating new content.
Or at least existing ones refocusing. Imagine revitalizing fleets that maybe have slowed down a bit, especially during content lulls. And what a great team-building exercise. And then if you strengthen that, it's a community sphere around STO that these fleets build. And if you strengthen that just, again, feeds energy and players back into the game. So you got to be careful how you manage this Foundry community. And while sometimes at the surface it might seem like the right thing to do to pull something, I would say really focus on the really big repercussions because those ripple out into the community.
Yeah, and beyond the community to bring new people into it.
And if you're interested in that Star Trek Phase 2 video, we have a link in the show notes, and Trek Movie has a great exclusive behind the scenes. Like the main antagonist gal is like an old Toss?
Yeah, she was like a guest star on a Mirror Mirror. I think.
Hey, we got community feedback coming up, but before we go to that, you got a chance to play a Foundry mission I think you want to give a plug
I did.
for.
The one that I got to play through was called The Forever of Madness.
Huh.
It's completely dialogue. There's no combat involved in this mission at all. So
and was that okay?
You'll know that. Well, yes, for mostly.
Okay.
To be honest, to be just straight up honest, I only gave the mission 3 stars, but I'll tell you exactly why. The concept of this story was awesome. I actually would have completely seen this as a Trek episode. It had a lot of Trek just written all over it.
Cool.
The problem is that it's so dialogue heavy, and you could tell that the author was not, well, he's not going to be published anytime soon as a novelist. Good writing. I won't knock it too much, but, some grammatical issues, blah, blah, blah.
Areas to improve over time.
Just a little bit for that. I also knocked it down because some of the environments weren't very believable, weren't very detailed. But, if you're playing this, it's more of a reading. It's almost like reading a novel.
Yeah, what I actually equated it to is these dialogue-heavy missions. We've kind of mentioned skipping them a lot, but really, I look at it. I have there's like a Star Trek comics app for the iPad that's just all Star Trek comics, and you got to pay for them. But it's like instead of going to the comic book store, I get those. And some evenings, it's like just the right time of night to read a comic on my iPad. And I started thinking, why read on my iPad when I could just go into STO and read a dialogue mission like I would read a comic, only I can move and stuff.
Yeah, and you can feel like you're more of a part of the action.
Yeah,
so that's a good point. And if you're in the mood for that kind of thing, this is a good mission to play through.
There you have it.
I have a couple other recommendations here for this week that I haven't actually been able to play through, but some of our community members have been talking really good things about.
We
those.
always vet all of these with the chat room too, and
Mm-hmm.
we've usually got like right now we have 191 people in the chat room while we do the show.
Oh, is that all?
I know, right? So we always go with them too. We make sure that we don't mention something wrong if we haven't played it.
So I want to mention one by Captain Revo, who was actually mentioned previously as one of the top published authors. So I have a good hope for this one. The mission is named 9 of Deep Space. I don't actually know what it's about. I haven't gotten my fingers on this one yet, but I look forward to playing it myself.
No, and he emailed us too, so thanks to him for sending us a note.
And obviously it takes place at Deep Space Nine.
Mhm.
And if you're a really big fan of that series, then why would you not want to play there?
There you go.
And the last one I want to mention is for KDF players. It's called Red Whispers.
Oh, I
It's
like
by
that.
the author named STARtruck. And again, I don't know exactly what this mission is about. I just know that there's some sort of mysterious mystery going on in a colony, and you're sent to investigate.
Ooh,
But apparently there's plenty of combat. It'll keep you engaged and a good story. So check it out. If
makes a
you're
Klingon happy.
Yeah.
Little combat does a Klingon good. All right, J-Man, let's jump into community feedback.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's important.
And welcome to the community feedback. You guys already know, you're clued in. We've got these headphones on. That means we're doing something with Skype. And
Something fancy and technical and magical.
we had the question. We asked you if you could take any moment from Star Trek lore and make it your inspiration for a Foundry mission, what would you pick? And some of you have written in, and we've brought in some of you on Skype, as well as assembled a few other Foundry experimenters and Star Trek fans. Welcome to the Skype wall, everyone. Now,
Hi.
let's get started with introductions, J-Man. Do you mind going around the board?
Say hi, Lord Ice.
Hello.
That's him in the top. And to his, what is that, left?
Whatever.
Is Tara or Knaffle. You might have seen both of those two before they appeared on our last video wall.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, down there
Some
on the
awesome.
bottom, right next to Chris, is Uyu, who actually has a
Hello.
whole series of his own missions published out there if you'd like to check them out. So he's got probably the most experience
Yeah.
of actually publishing of anybody that's on this board. But then
Welcome to the panel.
you all know Peregrine Falcon, who joined us for our Founders Writers
Math segment in the last episode. Yeah. Okay, so
Fucking
why don't we go around the board? Why don't we go around and start with some Star Trek moments, inspirations? Board one, we'll start with you.
I actually want to see at least a revamp, if not an entire series, building on like a Klingon version of the scene from AR-558. Like the entire episode, because
The
you
Deep
run
Space
around,
Nine
you're
episode,
fixing-
right? Yeah.
Yeah, because they're running around, they're fixing stuff, they're building up the characters, and then you've got this epic fight scene where everything just changes. It changes the entire perspective of the war for Cisco
Right.
and Dax and everyone.
And Nog.
Because
He loses
they're
his freaking
friends.
leg.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're friends. They just met them. They become friends, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It just changes the perspective of the war. It actually makes you feel for the little people.
Now, what would you envision being as the Klingon version? Would it be them versus Federation, or would you bring it to the
Yeah.
Undine, or what? You thinking versus Federation?
You could do it with just about any race, with the exception of the Borg, because the Borg don't do that kind of stuff.
Right.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That's understandable. So you've chose that because I'm guessing you're a Deep Space Nine fan in general too, right?
Well, yeah. For me, it's kind of like a tie between Voyager and DS9 because I love the Borg, but the DS9, it's just too awesome to decide.
Yeah.
It's a tie.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. All right. I fully understand, and that's a great moment to pull from. So, not a bad one. Now, Tara, why don't we move on? What's your Star Trek moment?
Well, when I emailed in, it was actually kind of a joke, but then once I thought about it, it could have actually been good. I initially emailed in saying, you know, the Harris and Janeway babies that they made the nukes, they come back and have
Oh,
revenge.
yeah.
Just
Yeah.
so
The warp lizard.
This is why I wanted this. Your email right here was why I wanted to get you on because I loved this. I loved that. So go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
That
But
was fun.
that was just a bit of a joke. But then I was like, on a serious note, if that Threshold could have been good, just bear with me. Right, it could have been good if they, I don't know, if you take the whole, idea of evolution with the whole warp 10 thing, with a big bag of salt, not a grain, that warp is possible and all that.
Big
Instead
bag
of
of salt.
him de-evolving into this like newt thing. They could have made him, you know, the guy, the alien guy in Hope and Fear, the one where he makes that ship and he tries to make the Voyager crew go back to Borg space.
Oh
yeah. Yep.
I remember that one. That's one of my favorite Voyager episodes.
Yeah, so if they made Tom Paris into him, he could have been like, I suppose, a 7 of 9. You know how 7 of 9 is really smart. He could have turned into the smart guy that Voyager could have needed to make it just a bit more dynamic
So
and
instead of
character development.
You're saying instead of de-evolving, then you could take the warp 10 threshold idea and make it super evolve you into some sort of superhuman thing.
And make a character much more interesting in the
A
process.
human universal translator, if I remember the episode right.
Yeah.
If you could have like a red shirt that's on your ship that you don't know, it's not your actual bridge crew. You could just create him and go, Ensign Ricky, just say Ensign Ricky, and then he's trying out because he's like the best like kind of sub pilot, and let him have his chance. And he goes on the shuttlecraft and he comes back, and then he has to go in sick bay, and then it's like he's going strange and stuff like that. He's just becoming evolved. It's much more of, I suppose, I don't know. You could make him either become like evil, and then you have to kind of, I suppose.
Or it
Kind
could
of
be
like Paris
similar.
when he got that new shuttle thing and it tried to kidnap him and
Yeah.
throw him into that singularity.
Hooked up to his brain. Yeah.
It could
Yeah,
also
well,
be
the
similar
problem
to
with
the
that,
whole
though-
Barclay thing where he end up with
Yeah.
that probe that made him super smart.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is you face two dangers. One is that you end up with somebody who's Gary Mitchell, who
Yeah.
becomes drunk on power and wants to squash everyone around him like bugs. A lesser form of that ends up being like the way Riker was when Q turned him into another Q, arrogant but not quite so evil and destructive.
Right.
Or
Good
you end up with a
intentions.
person becoming like Barclay was, or almost as bad, like a Wesley Crusher. So I just don't see a good outcome coming from this whole scenario.
Well, let me
no
ask
matter-
you guys, if you saw a mission in the Foundry thing that said this is a homage to Threshold, would you ever play it?
Yes,
No. Oh, yeah.
in an instant.
Yeah, really? Okay, all
I
right.
just love that episode.
Well, Tara, I love that one. Alex, why don't we go on? What's your Star Trek moment of inspiration?
I only have one, and that is the final battle on Star Trek 6 between Chang's Bird of Prey, the Enterprise A, and the Excelsior.
Oh, yeah?
Now, what is
Oh,
it specifically about that battle that you would see recreated?
Other than it being amazing.
'Cause
And the Burrell retrofit.
Yeah, the Burrell retrofit, the cloak doesn't exactly work properly at the moment, does it? Because as soon as you fire a torpedo, the enemy NPC just targets you,
Mm-hmm.
and you just don't want that.
Mhm.
What you need is some type of solution like that came up on the movie, because the thing's got to have a tailpipe.
Yeah. So an alternative to a space combat situation kind of a thing.
Yeah,
like
like
you could do something where maybe you have to draw the enemy into something else that blows up to defeat him or something like that. I like that. And of course, Star Trek 6 has got to be one of the strongest movies to pull any inspiration from.
True that.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually have a comment on that. It's actually another STOked reference.
All right.
Instead of blowing it out your A and lighting it on fire, light
Riker
up
maneuver.
on fire the thing that everyone else is blowing out their
Right.
butt.
Right. Nice. Now, all right. Did you? Oh, Alex,
Faster.
did you have? Was that? I didn't want to step on you if that was it, but I think Alex, you were wrapped up there.
Yeah.
All right. We'll move on to Peregrine. Peregrine, did you have a Star Trek moment you wanted to reference?
I did, and I think we all have seen it, that famous line at the end of In the Pale Moonlight, where Cisco sits in front of his log and recites what happens and realizes that he's done horrible things. He's committed terrible crimes. He's participated in the assassination of a senator, in the murder of multiple people. He's bribed officials, but he did it to save trillions of sentient beings. And he's
So he did it
decided,
for Section 31.
well, he's
Is that what they're doing?
decided that in this one case, that the ends justified the means. And that's exactly the kind of episode I'd love to see in the Foundry, where the player actually gets the choice. Do I commit horrible crimes, or do I let a whole bunch of people die?
So multiple
both
choice kind of
times.
scenario.
Yep.
I
Now,
may not
we've
like them, but Section 31 gets the job done.
We've seen a lot of references, actually. We had somebody email us as well mentioning that same episode in the Pale Moonlight. And I mentioned this a little bit before the show, that I'm not sure that every player would agree with that. Not every player as a captain would make the same choices that Cisco makes. But if they ever introduce branching objectives, as you've said, if
Yes.
you can have the player
Choice.
make a choice so they can see the outcome of whatever choice they make,
That would be great.
that would be an excellent mission
I agree.
to use as a
Someone
first
in
experiment.
the chat room just suggested like doing a Star Trek 4 scene or Star Trek 3 scene where they have to re-steal the Enterprise, steal your ship back.
Steal your shit back would be great.
It would be
See,
great if we
this-
could figure out a way to
now,
put your
we've
bridge
seen-
in there.
Yeah. Now, we've seen what happens when a Starfleet officer makes the opposite decision. In what was the episode called? I Hugh? Or I Borg. The one,
Iborg.
the one where they
Yeah.
capture the Borg, they name him Hugh, they discuss the
Right,
possibility of a
right.
visual matrix virus, and Picard decides to not destroy the Borg.
Yeah.
And decides to not save the Alpha Quadrant from the Borg.
Right.
And since that's happened, literally tens of thousands, probably more people in the Alpha Quadrant, sentient beings, have been killed by the Borg
Or assimilated,
Plus
yeah.
those messed up drones
yeah,
in Descent.
because of Picard.
Heavy. Now that's heavy.
Nope.
Mess up or mess up.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, I love the live panel, so I want to say thank you guys for calling in.
And we
uh,
love you.
Now we're gonna do some more of this. So if you'd like to join the live panel and call into Stoked, join us live at 11 a.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv on Saturdays, and then you can join the Skype wall and get your feedback right into the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, just a little clarification. Last week we made a boo-boo and said we weren't going to be live this Saturday.
We are.
Well, we are. But next Saturday we actually aren't. So what we'll be releasing in not this Tuesday, but obviously the following Tuesday, is a highlights of the Stowe Podcaster Summit. I came out a week ago, and we recorded the whole dang thing, and we've got a few moments that we want to share with you that we just loved, and so that'll be coming up on that weekend.
Then there might be one or two other things in the episode. We're still trying to work out what we can do without being in the studio. So stay
Yeah.
tuned for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get you what we can.
You bet. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Stoked, and we'll see you right back here next Tuesday.